So without further ado, please grab your plates because dinner is almost ready.
Thank you for that fantastic introduction. My name is Charlotte Simmons. I'm an editor and writer at The Guardian. I want to say thank you to the Good Food Institute for inviting me to be a part of tonight's event. Thank you to Stanford for hosting us. And thank you to you all for coming out on a Tuesday night to discuss a topic that is of great interest to me as a journalist, to many of us here in the Bay Area, and to an increasing number of people around the world. We all know that feeding our planet is an enormous challenge, but as a society, we are also questioning the consequences of what it means to produce food at scale, whether that's the ethics of factory farming and animal welfare, to the toll that agriculture takes on our environment. And yet, despite high awareness of the problems that we know arise from eating animals and the variety of meat and dairy alternatives that are already available, we also know that making a shift is not simple. In fact, new figures from the USDA predict that 2018 will be the year in which Americans eat more meat than ever before, and that's 222.2 pounds per person on average, to be exact. That sounds like a lot. It might not feel very encouraging, but at The Guardian, we are constantly examining the ways in which technology will impact our lives for better or worse. And I firmly believe that food and the food industry is an area where science and technology will have a resoundingly positive effect. And our guests tonight are on the forefront of that change, making products that a few years ago might have seemed a little bit like mad science, but today are being discussed as a vital part of our food future. And the question we are posing by tonight's discussion is, could the plate of the future consist of meat without animals, eggs without chickens, and milk without cows? And additionally, what opportunities are there for students to get involved in this intersection of science, food, and social impact? So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Steve, and take it in turn to introduce yourselves. Moving down.
Great, thank you. I am Steve Myrick. I'm the VP of Business Development at Memphis Meats. And at Memphis Meats, we are making meat. We are doing it a little bit differently than conventional agriculture. So we create meat directly from animal cells without the need to raise and slaughter livestock animals. So compositionally down to the level of the cells of the DNA, it is meat. It's what, if you're a meat eater, you're familiar with eating every day. But making it in this method has substantial benefits for animal welfare, for the environment, for human health, and other reasons. So we see this as a really meaningful part of our future food system. And as the VP of Business Development, I lead a lot of our strategic planning and our early partnerships in R&D and distribution and production, although we are not yet in market, and really mapping out what is that path and how do we need to make this, how do we make this a reality on a very large scale. I also take out the trash and do many things, given that we're a 20-person company.
Thank you, Steve. How do I follow that? So my name is Elon. I am the Business Innovation Specialist with the Good Food Institute. The Good Food Institute is a nonprofit organization that is working to create a more healthy, sustainable, and humane food system. And we're doing that by transitioning our food system away from animal-based products. So studies show that people make their food purchasing decisions based on 3 factors: the taste, the price, and the convenience of the food. And so in order to make products that compete with their animal counterparts, we are making products that are tastier, better priced, and more convenient than the plant or the meat, dairy, and eggs that are out there today. And we're doing that with 4 core program areas. The first is we're fostering innovation. So we're engaging public and private institutions to get the best and brightest minds working as entrepreneurs and as researchers in this space, what we're doing here today. So you are the best and brightest minds. The second thing is actually supporting those innovators and giving them support, everything from with their business plans to introducing them to investors and people within our network. We essentially function as an accelerator for the plant-based and clean meat space. The third thing is engaging with corporations, so working with the largest restaurants, grocery stores, food service manufacturers, etc., and helping them get more and better plant-based options. And the last thing is working with large institutions such as governments, grant-writing organizations that can funnel money towards plant-based and clean meat R&D and research and everything else. And so all of that combined is with the goal of making the default choice for eaters the healthy, sustainable, and ethical choice.
So, it works. So I'm Vivian Longquar. I direct the discovery group at Just. We are formerly Hampton Creek, and I think the young lady mentioned our company. So we have like a few products out, and you might know some of them. So we have this Just Mayo, where we replaced the egg by a plant substitute. We have cookie dough and cookies, and really soon, and in some places already out in the market, we have this scrambled egg. I think as well that it's nice to come right after you because we have exactly the same motto at GFI. So I just really feel like the plant-based or like alternative or cellular agriculture products will never take the space if these products are not taste better, if they do not are cheaper, and if they are not affordable and available. So that's really something our company is focusing on. Recently, we decided to join as well the CELAC team. So we were like for the past 4 years, we were mostly concentrating on finding the next generation of plant proteins that we can put in food products. But recently, like the past year or the past 6 months, we felt like plants are not always enough, and maybe as well to win the race and to change the system, we need as well to do some work on the cellular agriculture front. Just about my background, actually I spent almost 7 years here on campus, on the other side of campus, when I was doing my postdoc, so I'm so happy to see it here. It's really nice. I was at the Carnegie Institution for science, so I did my PhD in plant science, plant biochemistry, and the postdoc too, so I studied in France, then I came here at Stanford, and then actually that was my first job as a plant biochemist, and so I'm happy to be back here.
Welcome back. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Stanford. It's great to be here. There's a bit of an echo. Let me know if it's bad. So I'm Tim. I'm from Perfect Day. It's pretty echoey. Different direction. Is that better? Can you tell me? Okay, good. So I'm at Perfect Day. I am the CTO. I'm not the founder. I know originally that Ryan and Parimal, the two founders for the company, were originally invited, and so he got me instead. They're traveling, so I apologize. But I am the old man in the room, I think, when it comes to certainly being up here relative to all of you. So at Perfect Day, we are the milk without the cow component of Charlotte's introduction, and where we are taking a brewing process, just very similar to making beer, but we're making proteins instead. And really that whole process of making proteins through fermentation process is something that's very old technology, actually, and we're just applying it to a new idea. And the key elements to what we've created are really the enabling technology to make it scalable. And we are a B2B company where we are making the individual proteins that are then sold to larger corporations, strategic partners that would then use them as they would for any normal dairy ingredients. When you think of whey protein isolate or think of casein isolates, they're prolific within the food industry. And so our goal is to be mildly integrative and disruptive in that level, and we think that we have a chance to make a much bigger impact by making that move. We could also do the products directly to market. That's something that we've actually strategically chosen not to do, and we can go into some of those things. And there were some questions already that came up about that and why. But we just believe that for the time to market and our execution and staying focused, we decided to take this route. So we are right now, we're a Series A company, and we're currently working with those larger strategic manufacturing groups and with outside groups to really go global with what we're trying to do. So we're not messing around. And a little bit about myself. So I have spent some time here as a kid, actually here at Stanford. My father was the director of purchasing time ago, before any of you were, well, some of you, most of you were born anyway. It was on Welsh Road. There used to be different buildings there, and they're all gone now, with other big buildings around, which is funny. But I was at Cal Poly as an undergraduate, UCSF as a graduate student in chemistry and chemical biology, physics, and at Harvard, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. My actual background was mostly in oncology and making medicines, for making targeted therapeutics for cancer, way back when people thought that was impossible. And then later making other things. Malaria, cure for malaria using fermentation process. Again, something people thought was impossible, but we did it. And the list kind of goes on through different things. So I'm interested in making disruptive technologies at the core, so creating a seminal technology that is ultimately not only possible, but then scalable. And what Perfect Day is doing today is that exact same thing. It's taking something that's a core technology and really making it scalable and impactful.
Great, thank you. So I just want to take a minute and kind of gauge with you guys, the audience, how many of you have heard of some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight? Are you familiar with the term clean meat? Put your hand up. Okay, great. So a lot of people. I guess I was wondering, Elon, maybe you could kick us off by just talking about where things are at, really, in the clean meat space. How fast have things progressed, and why is so much, why has the pace of change been so rapid right now?
That's a question for me, or I feel like Steve is
Or
best
maybe
equipped
Steve, yeah.
to answer.
Nicely done. So the notion of creating or growing animal cells is by no means new. Biopharma companies have grown mammalian cells for drug development in very large scale for a very long time. The economics of that are very different from what we're doing. And the idea of clean or cultured meat has been around for a very long time. There's a famous Winston Churchill quote from essays maybe 80 years ago that I haven't memorized by heart, but he essentially predicted that this is how the world would soon be creating meat. So we are maybe a little late by Winston's parameters. But why now is the question that I heard. For one, I think there are some meaningful advances in related science that have really helped us. The cost of gene sequencing has dropped by many orders of magnitude, which is an important tool in our toolkit. Gene editing tools have become very precise and very inexpensive, which is another tool in our R&D toolkit. And then lab automation and data science, I know that those are probably things you hear in every VC pitch. But those are really important for us as we work with many, many different types of cells, many different formulations for how we cultivate those cells. Those are enabling tools that didn't exist or were very expensive 5 years ago that are essential to what we're doing. So in many ways, we're riding the coattails of other advances in related fields that have really unlocked ours.
And I also wanted to ask you, Steve, I know that your founder, Uma Valetti, moved the company from Minnesota to the Bay Area. And I was curious, why was that choice made? And is there something particular about being here in the Silicon Valley that makes this possible, that wouldn't be possible elsewhere?
In a word, it's talent. I've been on the Bay Area for, at this point, 2 decades, so I'm biased to it and I'm a huge advocate for it. And I'm sure many different companies would give you many reasons for why they're here and why this ecosystem is rich. But for us, the company moved and the company stayed because it had access to remarkable scientists in many important fields, remarkable engineers in fields that mattered, in some cases business and operations people, although I think you can find those anywhere, you don't need to be here for that. But that convergence was important. I think the investor community, the early adopter community, those to some extent matter and help, but the talent is what made this the home for the company.
Vivian, I wanted to ask you about, because your company's interesting because you're doing both sort of the plant-based proteins as well as also working on the clean meat project. And I was wondering if you could just talk to us about some of the discoveries your team has been making lately and how that relates to the new clean meat initiative that we know is coming out of Just.
Okay, so I'm going to speak only for the part I'm involved in. So my company, as I told you earlier, we're based on the primary interest is to find this next generation of proteins in plants, right? So we've developed this expertise, and we have developed a tool and a discovery platform which help us find in plants and discover in plants all these different proteins, analyze them, really understand the core of these plant proteins. And now if you think and you put in parallel, so we call that the seed and the cell, and then you put in parallel like the cell ag project, right? So in the cellular agriculture field, you have two main components. One component is basically cell line developments, like what cell lines are we going to use to do the scaling up? And I think it's a lot of things you mentioned is like, you're right, like we need to find these cell lines which are going to be able to, you want a lower doubling time, you want a higher density, so you have all these questions. And as well, which tissue are you targeting? What is your final product? Do you want to scale up a cell which is going to make like a chicken McNuggets, or I don't know, that's a McDonald's thing, right? I shouldn't say that. Like a chicken something, or do you want like a pork or a beef? And so there's a lot of work to do into cell line development. But then what's right now is prohibitive is the cost of the media to grow these cells. So all these cells need to grow in a growth. And this growth, basically, it's what? It's nutrients, basically it's peptides. Peptides come from proteins, other little metabolites, and other components that we don't understand very well. And actually, we believe that discovering in plants all these components and supplying that to the cell will as well be a very big part of making the cellular agriculture happen. So right now, what we do at Just is like we have the cell line development streamline, but as well we have the media development streamline. And we just started to work on that. And actually, the plant team is heavily involved in that. I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but
no, that's great. That's great. I guess I'm just curious the overlap between what your team does and how that feeds into.
So basically, the same way we've been screening for proteins to put in novel products, we're going to screen for plants which are going to be able to let these cells grow and to help these cells grow, and then to bring down the cost of the media.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're doing. And so there are a few other components. So when you think about the growth media, one very essential point is the FBS. So we want to make sure that we're going to grow serum-free. We want to grow our cells serum-free.
Yeah.
That's where we feel like the plant components are going to be essential. So can we find in plants metabolites which are going to be like phytomimics, and they're going to be able to enable the differentiation and the high density growth and the proliferation of these cells. And that's where we have all the two paths which are joining. It's like discovering in plants these phytomimics.
Yeah, maybe you want to just explain a little bit about the bovine serum, because that's quite an important piece of what makes a lot of, people want to get away from clean meat that has no animal.
Yeah, so serum fetal bovine is actually, I don't want to go into the details, but the way it's collected, it's pretty horrendous. It's like, basically it's really horrendous. So it's like you have pregnant cows, and then you need to kill them, and then you get this serum. And this is sometimes essential, though, to enable the cell growth. Some cells are not able to grow and proliferate without this component. So you can give the cells basal nutrients like amino acids, minerals, but then they still need some factors that we don't understand very well, which are in this FBS. But there are now some proof in literature, and if you start digging into it, you'll see that actually some plants can supplement some of these components that you'll find in FBS. And that's why we feel like looking into plants for these replacements can be an answer to remove FBS from your growth medias. So either you can make a cell culture and grow it serum-free, and that's bingo, that's fantastic. But if you cannot have this special cell line that you want to scale up without FBS, then you need to find replacements. And that's where the plant component comes into play.
Yeah, fascinating. Tim, I want to ask you some science-y questions as well. So you've described the process by which you make cheese as kind of similar to brewing beer. Can you explain exactly how that works, and also why you guys felt it was so important as a company to make a dairy product that is very, very similar to the real thing?
Yeah, so the idea for making this dairy product is again Ryan and Paramount, so I'm sorry. But the reason they chose that was because they were both independently vegetarian and really wanted to be vegan, and they were trying really hard to be vegan, and they are. But it's really hard because most of the products that are out there kind of suck, right? And so particularly with cheese and everything that comes from dairy that's made, turns into, it could be a flan, it could be anything, right? You can turn dairy into all kinds of things. And so they really missed that, and they thought there's got to be a better way to do this. They came from a chemical engineering and a cell biology background, and they thought there's got to be a way to do this. And after doing a lot of research, they realized that you can do this. And in fact, people have been doing things similar to this for a very long time. And so this is where what we're doing is maybe not as much of a stretch, which is something that I kind of like in terms of, there's a lot of things that are hard to do when you're trying to build a company and make products and do all these things, so you don't want to take off more than you can chew. And so how many of you have eaten cheese? Okay. So it's a very good chance that that cheese was processed using rennet enzyme. So you'll see on your cheese packages it says made with rennet. So rennet is actually originally isolated from cow's stomach, and that's how they used to make it, right? They used to store milk in the stomachs of cows when they transported it and turned it into cheese, and that's how they figured it out. So it's an enzyme, a protease that cuts on one of the casein molecules and turns that milk into curds and whey. And that's really the only way that can happen, right? I mean, you can do other ways of doing that, but it's the traditional way of doing it, and it's why everyone does that. But they don't harvest the rennet or chymosin from all the cow stomachs anymore. They cloned it, and they put it into a yeast, and they expressed it. And so we're essentially doing the same thing, right? But we're doing it now with the dairy proteins themselves. And there's a lot of reasons why people said it would be impossible to do this, but through a little bit of hard work, and we figured out how to do it. And so the key thing in here is, and why we do this, is because there's something special about dairy proteins, right? And when you look at milk, there's very few things that are white, right, when you think about it. And there's chalk, but there's very few things that are naturally white. And it's because it forms this great emulsion, right, with all the different casein proteins in particular, and all those casein proteins function to basically harness and capture insoluble things that are essential for your nutrition, right? Calcium and other key vitamins that are in there. And that's why babies are born drinking milk and they survive quite well with it, because it's got everything you need in there. But it's really the protein. The proteins are the secrets there. Whey proteins are highly nutritious, and that's why bodybuilders use them. They got the perfect complement of amino acids for bulking up. And so they're kind of great proteins, and they're super highly functional, right? Grandmas have been using them for thousands of years to turn it into, like I said, cheese and all these different products. And so as a result, dairy, we think of dairy as being kind of like the other barrel of oil. And it really is. When you look at the number of cows that are being processed into milk, it's huge, right? And it gets processed into all these different parts. And the reason for that, of course, is because there are times, there's variation in the number of cows that you have, and you can't turn a cow off, right? You can't just say, okay, stop making milk, please, right? They don't do that. They keep producing milk. And so all these farmers, they make a lot of cows, and then the cows are making a lot of milk, and then they have too much milk, but they can't turn it off. So they had to figure out, what the hell am I going to do with all this milk? And they all want to be profitable. And so they turn it into all these other things. And that's why dairy is used in so many things. I mean, it's used in pharmaceuticals, it's used all over the place. A lot of things, it's been turned down a little bit on the food industry, and that's primarily because of people's perception of dairy and where it's coming from. There's a big impact from people and wanting to be conscientious of things. And there's allergies associated with different components of milk, lactose. Some of the dairy proteins themselves are allergenic. That's why they can't use them in pharmaceuticals anymore. They were the perfect vehicle for pharmaceuticals, but you can't use them anymore because people are allergic to them, right? And so if we can make individual proteins that don't have the lactose in there, that are individual proteins, so you can change the ratio of those proteins, you can concoct milk and cheese and all kinds of things, and you can leave certain proteins out, and you can leave certain proteins in there, and you can change the functionality so much so that we can make yogurts and cheese and high protein milks in ways that dairy can't do it. which is really interesting, right? So we've now created enabling technology where we can make superior products. So we have a tremendous amount of inbound interest from large dairy users because they've been thinking about this for a very long time because they've had too much protein. The problem is it costs too much to separate out the individual proteins for them, right? They're just thinking it from a money perspective. Here we come along and we say, okay, not only will we give you each of those proteins, we'll give it to you and it's clean. There's no poop in there, right? That's a big deal. Most of the capital expenditure for dairy manufacturing is in cleaning up and killing off the bugs that are in poop, right? And when you remove that factor, all of a sudden, people who are making dairy see this as a big opportunity because now they don't need the same capital requirements. That's saving them huge amounts of money in terms of, I mean, everything. When you think, it costs a lot of money to make stuff, right? If you can remove any single unit operations from that process, that saves them a lot of money. That gets them excited, okay? Over time, as we scale, we can make it cheaper. And we think that we can make it cheaper than any dairy that's out there. And we have right now early metrics that definitely support that, which is really exciting. And we kind of see that coming through this year. So it's a really big deal for us. And the list goes on. This is just the beginning of things, and we see that there's a lot of opportunity here for being disruptive in a way that's not scary to people, right? Because now you're able to integrate it into things. I was at Beyond Meat previous to this. I built their products for Beyond Meat. Have anybody eaten Beyond Meat stuff? So I made that way back when. And it was to the point where you're thinking, okay, only vegans are going to want this. Well, actually, there's a lot of vegetarians out there who would like to have this too. And there's a lot of conscientious, guilty-feeling meat eaters that are out there too. And the market started to grow and grow and grow if it was good enough, right? If it was cost-effective enough. All of a sudden, you have people who are meat eaters who are choosing to buy this because they have less guilt. And we used to jokingly say our new advertising campaign is going to be, everyone's about eating less meat. We're going to say eat more meat. Just eat this meat, right? You can be guilt-free and everything. If it's good enough, right? And so the defining point there was, could you get Tyson in? So that was my challenge, was could you make something good enough to get Tyson in? Now, a lot of people were pissed off about that, right? Why would you want a meat company to be doing this? To me, that's exactly who you want to be adopting your technology. Because if you can interrupt their supply chain, you're having the bigger impact than you could have ever wished for, right? And so I see that in the medical industry. I see that in the food industry. I saw that in the fuel industry. I used to make jet fuel from sugar using yeast and diesel and stuff. It's consistent, right? You just make it better, and people will adopt it. It doesn't matter all the other hand-waving, feel-good stuff. Just make it better. And so this is the way to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you. So this is all really exciting stuff. We're talking a lot about innovations here, but I kind of want to bring it back to thinking about the consumer's perspective and some of the things we mentioned earlier around, cost, taste, and availability. And Elon, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you guys are thinking about it from the consumer's perspective. Does this feel like a really big market at the moment? And what are some of the challenges around maybe people's perceptions of this industry and clean meat in general?
Yeah. So it's great that you just ended your talk your little bit talking about the vegans to the vegetarians to the flexitarians, because that is the most exciting thing that's happening in this market right now. The products, plant-based and clean meat, when it comes out to market, clean meat, dairy, and eggs, these products are becoming more and more mainstream. So Mintel did a study, and the study reported that a third of millennials say that they're eating a meat alternative every single day. And 70% reported saying that they eat a meat alternative at least a few times a week. Now those are incredibly high numbers, right? And it doesn't mean that these people are eating Impossible Burgers or Beyond Burgers every single day, but what it does mean is that these people are deciding, these people as in the people of our society, are deciding to not eat meat or to replace meat very, very regularly in their diet. And why that's so exciting from a business perspective is because that market, that flexitarian market, is driving tremendous growth. And we can see that in the most familiar way with plant-based dairy. So who here 15 years ago had ever even tried soy milk? A few vegans. But the truth is that we hadn't even heard of oat milk or hemp milk or probably even almond milk. And today, those words are staples, pantry staples, one could say. And they are those products that compete directly with regular dairy, take up 10% of the entire dairy market. Now, plant-based meat is kind of where plant-based dairy was 20 years ago. It's less than 1% of the entire market, but according to the CEO of Pinnacle Foods, which is a multi-billion-dollar food conglomerate, he says that plant-based meats are where plant-based dairy were, and that they're on trend to have a tremendous growth in the next few years. And we can see that with, for example, the Beyond Burger coming from this guy and our friends Ethan Brown and everyone else. They were the fastest test on menu to national rollout of any item in TGI Fridays history. And today you can get Beyond Burger at TGI Fridays. So that's not like a hippy-dippy place, that's a place that is very mainstream. Similar story, Impossible Foods just launched their sliders at White Castle. And so now, in 150 locations of White Castle, you can actually get a Beyond Burger, a Beyond Slider. And actually, I just read Business Insider, they did like a taste test, and apparently it won, which is no surprise. Because these products are getting really, really good. And that's the whole point, right, is the price, taste, convenience. So the taste is getting there, and the price is just a matter of scale, as we've talked about. And the convenience is getting them to places like TGI Fridays, or the Stanford Dining Commons, or anywhere else that is really convenient. And so I think it's all of that growth that is causing people to look, and also causes Lux Research, which is the foremost research arm looking at the space, to say that a third of the entire protein market is going to be alternative proteins. Like the entire global protein market is going to be a third alternative proteins by 2054, which is huge. And that number came out before the Beyond Burger and before the Impossible Burger were even in market. So like, how much should it be? Who knows? Actually, some people know. We have a graph, the Good Food Institute. Thanks, my biggest fan. So yeah, that answers the trends. Was there a second part of the question?
Well, I guess, and I would love to get all of your thoughts on this really, but on some of these issues that we've talked about, if we're gonna make this an accessible item that anybody can, that's gonna be disruptive in the food system, how are we addressing some of those issues like cost? Because we know, clean meat, for instance, is very expensive to produce at the moment, and we kind of want it to be priced at a price point so that somebody might pick it in a grocery store, and also taste. I mean, I would love to hear what kind of reactions you get from people who try your product and some of the areas you feel like maybe it needs tweaking or don't know. Yeah. Steve probably has some thoughts.
I guess I'll start by maybe explaining our philosophy a bit around how we talk about this to consumers, to partners, etc. And it really starts with this reality that meat is core to the human experience. It's culturally ingrained. It's central to a lot of cultures and traditions around the world. I grew up eating meat. I still eat meat. And we acknowledge that and we embrace that. So we fully applaud, and I eat lots of plant-based alternatives. But ultimately, we do believe that meat eaters for the foreseeable future will recognize meat, want to eat meat, and don't particularly want to hear animal welfare, environmental, other reasons why they shouldn't be doing what it is they're used to doing and they love. So we embrace that fact. And we think ultimately taste is our avenue to market. At its core, again, our products are meat, and meat eaters recognize them as such. Which means our fundamental challenge isn't to trick the taste buds or to make something appear to a meat eater like it is meat, which is a considerable challenge. Our challenge is a different one, which is to do this economically and at scale, which is also a considerable challenge. I don't want to downplay that, and not one that we or anyone has fully cracked yet. Ultimately, again, the core first principles for why we believe this will work are pretty straightforward. It takes about 23 calories of feed that we give to a cow to get out 1 calorie of beef. So that's an incredibly inefficient machine if you think of a cow as a way to turn feed into meat. Our process, we expect to land at about 3 to 1. So that's an enormous gap that we can slide into. We also expect at scale for our process to use only about 1% of the land, about 10% of the water, and about half the energy of conventional meat, of raising cattle to produce beef. And all of those are inputs into cost. So from a first principles point of view, we have quite strong conviction that we'll be able to ultimately reflect those realities in the cost of the products that we produce. There is a considerable amount of work to do on the R&D front, and at small scale, to make sure that the inputs that go into our process are animal component free, inexpensive, widely available, and that a supply chain exists to sell those to us in very large scale. So there are challenges that we don't like to downplay, but ultimately we do believe, and we are fortunate to have a number of major players in the food industry believe that this is one that we will solve.
Great. I don't know if Vivian or Tim, you had anything you wanted to add on the respective challenges you're facing around those issues?
Yeah, so I just have been thinking, like, I think, yes, as you mentioned, we made so much progress into the plant-based materials, the plant-based products, but I still feel like we're not there yet. And even though you mentioned these millenniums replacing part of their diet, but I still feel like there's a big part of the world which is not there, and where they're really going to be focused on getting meat, eating more meat, because of cultural aspects, because of like so many reasons. So I don't think we have won the game yet. Like, I think we're far from there. I think making these products better, that's definitely a big game changer, but I don't think we're there yet. I think like people still crave meat no matter what. And as well, that's why I feel the agriculture component can help to win that category of people. The second component as well is like, I think the way we place our products in the supermarkets is essential. And right now we're not there yet. It's like if you look at most of the plant-based products, they are still in the wrong aisle or in the wrong section, because people are not going to go towards them. But if they were mixed up in between the meats, then maybe people would access them more rapidly. That's just my thoughts. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really great thought. And I know, I mean, for instance, you guys faced a lot about, you know, what we call the product, right? I know Hampton Creek just faced a lot of opposition from Unilever around using the term mayonnaise. And I know just today, there's been opposition from the beef industry about using the term meat. In connection with clean meat, and where.
But I think that's when getting people like Tyson and all these big people, that's going to help to win the battle. It's because if you can infiltrate their system, if I can say, then they will help us to make these changes and these cultural changes and this FDA, because you need to get FDA on your side. All these nomenclature changes. So that I agree with you. That's essential to get these main players.
Yeah, okay. So being the old guy in the room again, even just 3 years ago, this would be a very different conversation, right? We'd be talking about who would ever eat plant-based meats that are like real meat, that cook like real meat. That's freaky, that's Frankenmeat, right? And now we don't even talk about that. It's just totally obvious that it's awesome. People love it. People are adopting it all over the place. So this is a continual conversation, and we're on the steep part of this trajectory, I think. And it's been fun, coming from the medical industry, coming from all these different things. This is the fastest, most exciting area that I've ever been involved with, and it comes from everywhere. And the strategics, right? We have no problem getting inbound interest from literally the biggest food manufacturing companies in the world. They see this as an obvious thing. It's happening, and they all want to be involved. They want to be involved as soon as possible, and we just have to be careful about making sure that we're not letting them get too close in a way that we can hold on to our IP. So that's just a strategic thing on our end to make sure that we can be viable as a company, right? But the important thing is they have no concerns about this going forward because they know the market better than we do. They know that people want good food. They want to know where it comes from, and they're willing. If they know the why about what you're doing, they're able to overlook the how, if it might be something that they're concerned about. And if they tend to be on the more educated side and they've learned about the how, then they're a little less concerned about the how because it totally makes sense. It's like that, yeah, that's the only way you could do this. That makes sense, and there's never been a problem with any of that. And we can talk more about that. But what's interesting is to see, on how things have changed. And so this is where I really like about the clean meat sector and what we're doing with regards, we don't call ourselves clean meat because we're making clean dairy, I guess. But we're doing it differently, and what we're doing is we're reinventing the protein supply chain. Okay, right? So right now, most of these other products, they used to be all made out of gluten. There were soy, and soy was kind of working its way into it, but it was really just all gluten, right? Which is really not digestible. There's no real nutritional value there. It just kind of gets to that bouncy feel of the food. So they're trying to get the texture out of it with lots of salt, right? And they're pretty crappy. Then there was the whole soy thing, and that came in. That gave you the nutrition, which is great. But there's some other downsides to that. Mostly it's perception, maybe misperception. I'll leave that up to you. But now they're bringing on all the other protein supply chains that Elon mentioned. But none of them are really that functional. And so where that's important is to a nerdy scientist, right? So we want proteins that actually are native and then they can denature. And they're functional. They can actually cook, they can change, they can do what food does, right? Because when you take grandma's food and when she makes it with the fresh ingredients, she's making food that's raw, truly raw, and then cooks. And there's a whole chemistry that's happening there. And that's actually, it's completely different than having something that is coming from a highly processed route. And so it makes a big difference, and it's only getting better. And to the other point that you're talking about, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of work to do. Here's the thing, though, is the cow is not going to change that much. Like, a steak can't get any better, but we can, right? We can constantly improve. We can constantly adapt. We can adapt to what people want. We can adapt to what people need. There may be different geographical requirements to what people need, completely different from a nutritional and even micronutrient perspective. But we can also adapt to the changing world. And Charlotte and I were talking about this outside, but some people don't want to admit it, but global warming might be happening, right? And things are going to happen, right? Crops are going to change, where we can grow crops, where we can grow animals, where we can do all these things are going to change. So we need to be adaptive. Those traditional supply chains are all highly dependent on the world not changing at all, and that's not going to happen, right? And so what all these groups are making up here are adaptive technologies, things that can work with our ever-changing environment, right? And so, for example, what we're doing is right now we can use sugar to make our proteins. We can use starch. We can use cellulose. We can use wood pulp, right? And so where this is all going is we can use a lot of things that aren't nutritious foods right now. They're low-value carbon sources and turn them into high-value carbon-based proteins. So it's pretty exciting when you think about it, right? And being able to stand the test of time. And all of our asses are online for that. It's our responsibility to do the right thing in the right way and to be prepared in the right way. And then there's the inbound interest realizes that. You all know that. And it's all happening. So clean meat's happening. Clean milk's happening. It's all happening. It's just how fast.
Great. I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about, we talked a little bit about talent in the area, and yeah, I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about, what role you guys see the future generation is playing in this industry, particularly, students and people who might be interested in getting into this field. And I would love to hear about how you guys kind of personally got into this, because I know I've spoken to some of you and you said, I never really imagined, working in food tech, and it's still a developing and growing field. So I would love to hear, how did you get into the industry? What attracted you to it? And yeah, what role do you think young people today are going to be playing in this growing industry? Whoever is eager to take that one, but.
I'm happy to start.
Sure.
So before Memphis Meets, I worked at Boston Consulting Group, the management consulting firm. So the MBA students here are probably very familiar with the case interviews and that entire process, and probably 30 or 40% of you will end up going into it. For what it's worth, I did that for about 5.5 years and have very good things to say about it. But I got to the point where I spent some time being introspective around the impact I want to have and the work that I want to do day in, day out. And I kind of made the list of mega trends that I believe in, that I think the world needs, and clean meat and kind of solutions for our food system were at the top of the list. So I more or less followed around Uma, our CEO, and stalked him at various places where he was speaking and kicked down the door and convinced him to hire me. So for future students, I would say two things. There are incredible entrepreneurial options in this area. Food production is not an area that has been incredibly consolidated historically, and not one where I believe it will be going forward. If you look at food brands, there are big players, but there are any number of specialty, niche, local, regional types of companies, and I think the food system going forward will look similar to that. So I think for those who have the entrepreneurial itch, there are any number of opportunities to start companies in this space and be very successful. For folks who want to work for the companies that are in the space, for one, I'd just say be patient, since we are all at a very early stage, and the companies are all small, very much R&D focused. So the hiring that we're doing now, although rapid, is very focused in very specific scientific disciplines. But I do see this being an incredible job creator and an incredible opportunity to participate in something that the world needs very much.
Great. Elon?
Yeah, so I think even before answering the question, I just want to take a step back and recognize how exciting of an opportunity this is. Because if you care about climate change, or about global poverty, or about human health, or about animals, or about many other issues that are happening on the planet today, and at the same time you want to work on a really interesting and challenging scientific problem and business case, or business problem as it were, and at the same time you want to make boatloads of money. Okay, people react to that. There's not a lot of opportunities that let you do all three of those things in a truly, truly effective way. And this plant-based meat, clean meat space is that. It really is an opportunity to do all of those together. And so when we think, what are the ways that students can best get involved in this space, the Good Food Institute really sees two ways. The first is going out there and starting a company. So like Steve said, the entrepreneurial opportunities here are huge. And like I mentioned before, right now, plant-based meat, and clean meat at that, because it's at 0, is less than 1% of the entire meat market. And according to Richard Branson, in 30 years, it will be 100%. And even if you say 50%, it's still trillions of dollars that are moving from an industry that essentially doesn't exist to an industry that's going to be huge. So really exciting opportunities from an entrepreneurial perspective with investors, like Tim mentioned, like Tyson Foods and Cargill, and people who really know their stuff. So going out there starting a company is one, really exciting, two, probably the most impactful thing that people can do, and three, it's a pretty special thing because right now we're seeing tons and tons of capital, which is not that typical. If there are any early stage entrepreneurs in this room, anyone? Have you tried to talk to VCs? Were they nice to you? Well, in this space, they're awfully nice to us because there's a lot more capital than companies, which is really cool. And then if you're saying, okay, I don't want to go start a company, then I think the second thing is going and just getting food experience. So whether that's working at one of the companies on this stage or any other company, even things like Kraft Heinz, and getting experience in what is working in food like, being able to apply that knowledge later to a small food company, a food tech company, a clean meat, dairy, or eggs, or plant-based meat, dairy, or egg company, really, really valuable experience. So that's sort of those two paths. And then, of course, there's many other paths that could lead you to where you want to be. But if you want more info, come talk to us, because the Good Food Institute is here to help people who want to get in the space.
So I'm going to respond to two of your points, I think. The first one, you mentioned the VC companies like being willing to give money. So you might disagree with me, but I think they're willing to give you seed money, but I don't know how patient they are, though. And right now I feel like all these projects that we're starting that we're growing are like heavily challenging. And like, I don't know how many years we're gonna need more. And clearly like the VC firms, they can get impatient about like when do they gonna get return on their money. So I think it's one piece of it, right? So I think we need patience too. And yes, this money for long-term projects, not just like seed money to push and start something and never finish it. The second part is like, I'm not sure what I understood when you said boatload of money. Like, I'm not sure I'm making boatload of money. And I don't think people are in this field to do that. But I think that's personal, right? That's my personal feeling. So actually, I never thought I would be in the industry at all. I didn't even know food was a science, until 5 years ago. I'm so sorry. I knew about molecular gastronomy, but I didn't know about like food science. And so I've been really classically trained. So I really did like plant genetics. I did really all these very classic scientific training. And I really thought that I might end up in like a Monsanto company or something like that. And as well, like the moment I started to look for a job in the market, in the industry, I realized that actually it was a biofuel time, but the biofuel, like they were going down, right? Like 3 years before, everybody was exciting about biofuels and making all that work. And then when I was looking for a job, actually, that was going down. And so as a plant biochemist, I was like, what am I gonna do? Either I go and sell my soul to Monsanto, or finally, suddenly we had these kind of companies who started to pop up. And that's how I ended up at Just, like Hampton Creek, because they were looking for a plant biochemist. So I think what I'm trying to say is like, always develop transversal skills, like don't get too specialized. I mean, of course, like own your own technology, but keep always an eye for like transversal options, and don't think about it a bit differently. Like you might study something really in depth, but like open your horizons, and you never know where you're gonna end up. I think that's my advice.
That's great.
Can I comment on the VC thing?
Yeah.
So I think your point is a very valid one. Part of what we do at the Good Food Institute is actually work with VCs to educate them on what this technology actually is, and two, what they can expect when engaging with a company who's working on this kind of technology. And one of the core things is talking about, here is our timeline and what we expect and what the experts like Valetti and others working in this space expect from a timeline. But we can't promise anything, and that needs to be very well understood. And I think that this whole aspect of transparency is a huge, huge plus for clean meat and plant-based meat, because when we look at the things that we're competing against, there are laws that prevent us from seeing what happens on these farms. Versus like a clean meat facility would have a live stream. Like, why not? We could watch it right now, future panel. So being really transparent from the very early on stages is essential, and I think that's how we're going to manage those expectations.
So I talk too much, but there's a lot of thoughts here on. So I'm thinking about you guys. So is everyone here is part of the business school? Is that right? I'm guessing, maybe from all over. But so as you're out starting your company, timing is everything. Being passionate about whatever the hell you decide to do is critical, because times are hard. There are going to be really hard times where you're going through where you're making, you're bringing in people that are counting on you, right? And you're raising money and you're doing all these things, and it's not always easy. And you have a lot to learn. You guys, you're from Stanford. You're the smartest people in the world, right? You know everything. And so I'm not worried about you guys, but no, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and so you have to be adaptive, and you got to pick yourself up, and blah, 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 right? So you've heard all that stuff. I'm just going to echo it. Right now, the VC funding in this sector is good. There's a lot of enthusiasm about it. They see that where this is going. We have investors that have never invested this early, and they're some of the biggest investors in the world. And they look at this because they see this as new opportunities for how markets are moving around the world and where it's going. And they see that it can redefine in some cases, their geopolitical space in the world in a way. Not political, but geoeconomic space in the world is a real opportunity because things are changing fast. And so that's pretty cool, you know, when you have an entire country backing you. I think on a personal level, I've been lucky. You know, I've chosen things along the way. I've definitely been passionate about things. I grew up in kind of the Mission District in San Francisco when it wasn't, I was telling Charlotte, you know, it was back in the day when it was a lot tougher than it is now. And I got my ass kicked a lot, and I had no idea what I was gonna do, and I was a bit of a troublemaker. And I was good at stuff, whatever, managed to stay out of just enough trouble. And then I read an article in US News and World Report, it was 10th grade, and they were talking about genetic engineering and what this company was doing to make insulin and using bacteria, and I thought, that's fucking awesome. I wanna check that out. So I jumped on the Muni bus, and I can't remember, I took 3 buses, and then I walked, and it was really late at night, because I left after school, and I got to Genentech, and they had one building, and there was a light on, and I knocked on the door, and somebody let me in, and I said, I just read this article, and they spent 3 hours showing me, and they were passionate about what they were doing, and I thought, you couldn't fucking do anything else on this. This is awesome. This is what I want to do. I want to do something like this. I don't care what it is. And the reality is it was an enabling technology that was making a difference for all the right reasons, and nobody else was doing it, and everyone else said it was impossible. And I love that kind of shit, right? So I want to do all the stuff that nobody else is doing. Because if somebody else is doing it, they don't need me, right? And so I've been in the cancer field, so making the antibodies. Genentech bought that. Worked at Genentech for a while, big company. Not a big fan. I'm not a big company guy. Same thing, Harvard, Novartis bought it. I had to go there for a little while. I left. I'm not a big company guy. Beyond Meat. Amyris, Total bought it. Not a big company guy. And then Beyond Meat, Total jumped in. You know, they don't need me again, right? I've already done my job. That's my role. And so each of you are going to have your job in this process in terms of where your expertise is. I could not be a Ryan and a Paramount, our founders, right? They came up with a wacky idea. I'm not good at coming up with wacky ideas, but if you give me something to solve, I can figure out maybe how to do it. And most of the time, I don't even know what the fuck I'm doing, okay? Right? And I think that's the safest place you can start from, is just admitting you don't know what the hell you're doing. And the last part is ask for a lot of help. You'll get it from the best places. People will trust you, and listen, right? So you're going to bring in a lot of old guys like me into your company, right? And we're going to tell you, you might want to consider this or whatever, and you may be really cocky, right? And you're going to lose your street cred when you do that, because the reality is you don't know what the fuck you're doing, right? And so, and times change, so even the old guys don't know what we're doing either, right? But at least maybe we have a lot of scars in our lifetime that there's a lot to learn from, right? So talk to the old people that are outside of your industry, in your industry, whatever. It's all relevant, but that's the best thing you can do. Don't be afraid to get really dirty along the way. Not like, like Trump dirty. I mean like get in there and get into the technology that you're creating or whatever and really know it, right? Really understand it. Get beat up in your technology, know it better than anybody else, because when push comes to shove, you're gonna have to know how to move that technology in some way that you probably didn't anticipate in the first place. And
you should say, get the old guy on board.
Yeah,
Get the old guy on board.
Yeah, get the old guy on board. I don't know. You don't necessarily need an old guy, right? There's a lot of. That's the paradigm I'm familiar with. But I was going to say something I forgot. But anyway, ask for help, be humble, do the best you can, do it for all the right reasons, and you'll probably be great. And you'll recruit the best people, right? So we have a lot of people who want to come in and work for us at Beyond Meat, all these companies I've been talking to you about, because there's a lot of good reasons to do this stuff, right? And it's a lot of fun. And so the inbound interest of the people who are coming in, they too are passionate, and they are willing to go that extra mile. I have to force my people to take vacation, honestly. And that's a good thing, but you need to take care of them, right? And this is the other thing, your job changes all the time, right? You thought you were coming in to run a company, and instead you're running a nursery. Right, because their kids are going to cry, they're going to whine about stuff, and you've got to pick them up and hold them up for reasons that you don't even understand, right? And so it's a wonderful life. Do all of it. and just kick ass. That's what we ask you to do. This is your responsibility. You're at one of the best schools in the world. Kick ass, all right? I'm counting on you. My kids are counting on you.
Great. I'm sure after that you are all contemplating going and kicking some ass in the food tech field. I really want to make sure we have time to throw it out to you guys and get some questions. I'm sure there's a lot out there. I think I even saw a hand pop up at one point during the discussion. So I believe we have a microphone that's going to come around, and if you have something you want to ask the panelists, please do shoot your hand up.
Or if you actually want to.
Or come to the back and introduce yourself and ask a question.
Hi, thank you. It's been really interesting. I'm a bit ignorant about what clean meat is made of. Like, I would love to hear what the ingredients are that go to make up a clean meat steak or burger.
Sure, I'm happy to take that. It starts with cells, animal cells that we take from high-quality livestock. We then look for the cells that have the capacity to renew themselves outside of the animal, and then further try to refine that pool of cells to ones that will taste great, grow efficiently within our environments. But at the core, it's animal cells, whether it be skeletal muscle, connective tissue, whatever it may be. We then feed it what industry will call cell culture media, what we call feed, which is a mixture of nutrients, so very standard, typical things. It's carbohydrates, it's fats, it's proteins for the cells to ingest. They, of course, need to be in a different format than what the animal would eat, but the basic building blocks are the same as far as what cells metabolize. And then the other key component, as Vivian mentioned, is growth factors, which are essentially molecules that create signals for the cells, which say, continue to grow and proliferate, now differentiate to be skeletal muscle or whatever type of cell you're destined to be. We leave them in that environment for several weeks, and then we harvest meat out of it and cook it and eat it. So again, at its core, it is animal cells, it's animal DNA, and it's fed a number of familiar things that are formatted in a somewhat unfamiliar way if you're a cattle farmer. And then we are kind of all collectively trying to solve this question of how do we introduce some of those signaling molecules in a way that doesn't require scary animal components.
Great.
Hi, thank you for the panel. This was very informative. My question is about probably what are the biggest technologies that we're looking at today to make the entire clean meat generation process more cost efficient? Like, what are the biggest technologies we might be counting on?
It's a great question.
I think I have one freebie that I can hand back to you, Elon.
You want me to go?
I suppose it builds well off the last question, which is the feed for the cells. That's by far the largest single input into our costs. And again, it's some of the components into that cells don't metabolize, that are very, very costly and sold into biopharma in some cases for $1,000 per milliliter. So our core challenge is to take those very high cost, high value components and find substitutes that are low cost, not necessarily pharma grade, but food grade and ag grade, and available in very large quantities. And then create those into formulations of feed that our cells still like and will still allow them to grow really effectively. So at its heart, solving for what do we feed the cells and how do we make that economical is really the core challenge. The cells themselves are also really relevant to this. There are high performers, there are low performers, and the difference in efficiency is extreme. So continuing to isolate and find more and more productive and better cells.
And can you also talk about, like you mentioned when you were talking about automation playing a part in this, so how do you see automation playing a part in all this?
Yeah, there's the right now answer and there's the when we are in market answer. Right now, it's more a question of lab automation and finding high throughput ways to do a lot of what I just described. So to find high performing cells, to find effective components that we put into our feed formulations. the more shots on goal we can get in an R&D setting, the faster that work will be. So some of the kind of core automation tools that allow biology to go faster are extremely relevant for us now. At scale, when we think about a production facility, there are huge opportunities also to make that highly automated, clean, controlled in a way that a slaughterhouse will never be. But that's a little farther down the road. That's the longer term answer.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for coming and speaking to us today. It seems like one of the big goals of the alternative protein industry is sort of the worldwide eventual adoption of its products. I hope I'm right in saying that, or assuming that. And I was just sort of wondering how you sort of deal with maybe the ethical problem posed by sort of replacing more traditional animal products worldwide, whilst the production of alternative proteins is still relatively sort of protected by patents owned by companies and fairly infeasible at sort of a local or personal scale. To whoever wants to.
Everyone's looking at me. I'll address the plant-based side. I think that clean meat people can give their direct answer. I think from the plant-based side, you're actually seeing a lot of opportunities. For example, there's actually a dairy farm in New York that has recently decided that they're not doing dairy anymore. And they're going to convert their farm to growing plants that can be used for plant-based milks. And that's because they identified that they could make more money doing that. And so I think from the plant side, you're seeing a lot of plants that previously were not super high value becoming higher and higher value because they can be used in products that can now be processed in a way that makes them higher value. So pea protein is like going crazy in terms of the demand because the Beyond Burger uses pea protein and a lot of other products are using pea protein. And so now when we talk about farmers, say, that are growing cattle, and that is a pretty unprofitable endeavor. I've heard that the numbers are like in the low tens in terms of how much money you can actually make off of a head of cattle. And so that's pretty bad. And so if you can replace that with plants, then you can actually do really, really well. And growing plants is not a very high-tech process. And that is something that is accessible to the developing world as well as the developed world.
So can I complete your answer?
Please.
I think as well another part of the answer is working with governmental agencies like the FDA and change the standard of definitions. So it's like when you have ketchup, right? It's like, what is ketchup? Normally it's like something you have a recipe, a formulation. It's like it's changing that slightly. So we had to go through that for the mayo, and that's why, when we had all the story about, like, we call it mayo, is it mayonnaise, it is mayo, and you have a standard of definition for what is mayonnaise. And so that's why we cannot use that word. But it's really working with like agencies and maybe making new rules and evolving around that. That's for the plant-based components, and like if you want to change an ingredient in a product, I think that this is kind of easy, and I don't think there's so much ethics around that. I think it's just people with interests that they are trying to protect. I think the ethical part is going to come with either even the way you produce the milk, you produce these proteins, or the way the cellular agriculture is going to come. It's like, I don't think we have any rules right now of what is ethical, what is not ethical, how people are going to react to having this cell growing out of an organism, and is that going to be meat or not? It's like, if you think about scientifically, yes, that should be meat. But then I don't think right now we know what are the rules for how people are gonna perceive that in a product. And I don't know if you're working with the FDA, or like we're trying to work with the FDA, for instance, on our side to define this new set of boundaries and finding the right ethics too.
For us, I might have heard the question a little differently, kind of the ethics of the subsistence farmer who might have some animals and access to a pasture. For us, what we're doing is an and not an or when we think about conventional agriculture. The UN projections for meat demand globally are that it will double in about 35 years, and the resources that we put into meat production simply cannot double. So we're not here to be the world's entire meat supply. We're here to be a part of a solution that we think will be sustainable for the broader food system. So the subsistence farmer, or the people who have access to animals, access to pastures, and that's part of how they live, I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon. I do think to meet the doubling demand for meat from a growing world, we need to be part of that solution, as well as other conventional methods.
So I'll just do one more question. So you get a lot in there, right? So on the IP front, there's every step of everything we're doing requires innovation, and there is patent opportunities there. The products themselves, there's use, process, and composition of matter. So if you're ever making anything new and you're defining it, then you can patent that technology as long as it falls. There's these 103 and 104 rejections you get at the U.S. Patent Trade Office, and so it has to be novel. Obviously, how you're doing it. And in terms of the adoption and different markets, so for meat and stuff, it's interesting, right? And for dairy as well, because they have, you grow a lot of cows, and then you have too many cows, and then you have too few cows. And so there's this constant price curve that's happening, certainly in the dairy area. And flattening out that curve would be beneficial to everyone, even the farmers, and the farmers recognize that. And so we have, I think it's the number 6 biggest dairy company in the world that we're talking to, and I went to their farm, and they had 50,000 cows on one farm, right? And the president of the company said, look, I don't like what you're doing because you're going to ruin everything that I've built, but I get it, and I want to be part of it because it just makes sense. And this is a guy who has a Fitbit on every cow, and the cow, you go to this place, not a single fly, and you can't even smell any pee or poop or anything like that. I mean, it's an incredible farm, right? And so, but ultimately those cows are being milked 3 times a day, so you don't want to do that or limit that as much as possible. So there is a balance on how this can happen. This is not going to happen right away. It's not going to take over things. And so it can happen in a way that's in line with kind of this dynamic homeostasis that our world exists in.
And just to add to Tim's point, a farm with 50,000 cows is not a small mom and pop operation. And
one farm.
That's one, right. I think that's a really big misconception that we need to address when we think about this, is that more than 90% of the meat that we're eating in the US comes from factory farms. And factory farms are not owned by the farmer that you see on the package. In fact, they're owned by large corporations. And unless you're very, very adamant that corporations are people and we don't want to hurt their feelings, when we see disruptive technologies, I think it's quite a good thing that considering all the benefits that this brings, that we would be shaking up a little bit of that system that has 50,000 heads of cattle or 60,000 birds stuffed into a little house, as it were. So,
yeah, ideally, the farmers would go back to the traditional ways of doing things with much smaller farms, so their impact is smaller, and they're doing it in a way that's in balance with the earth and with the cow. And then that becomes a really premium product that people spend a lot of money for that can support that farm and that farm owner in a way that works for everyone. And meanwhile, we come along and we provide the mass amounts of food that is still awesome in all of its ways, but is affordable and can get to everybody, whether it's on a Joe's Totino's Pizza or it's in some high-end Momofuku restaurant.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the next question. What have you got?
Sort of a follow-on to that, when you look at emerging markets and as countries go from poverty to hopefully middle class, they spend a lot more of their money on protein and meat-based proteins. So specifically, China has made that jump over the last 25, 30 years. You have a lot of people, they can afford a lot of meat now. How are they looking upon the future of protein?
So most of our investors are from that area, actually, because they see it at the leading edge on this whole thing, and they're super excited about doing it in a way that is, again, in balance with how they're doing it. So a lot of the meat that we've made from these different things are being formulated into wonton instead of burgers. There's lots of things that are happening like that. But on the dairy side, people want milk. They want their kids to be tall. And so they'll do that, they'll pay extra for that and everything. And so we have to do it here in the United States first to kind of get street cred, FDA safety in line, and then the adoption over there will be much more rapid. But you're right, the growth is enormous there. But the early trend is big acceptance.
Yeah, I don't want to generalize countries as a whole, but I could broadly bucket reactions that we hear into two categories. There are countries that have very robust meat production and supply, and I think countries like that are really focused on stewardship of their resources, given that all of those countries siphon a remarkable amount of their land, water, energy, and so forth into livestock production and suffer some of the pollution and other downsides of that. And there are countries that do not have significant domestic meat production who see this movement as a way to gain food security, where they are not necessarily reliant on trade partners to bring in what their populations want and need in order to survive. So two very different reactions, but both very optimistic and positive.
One more really quick, sorry, I never shut up. But so interesting thing, about 5 years ago at Beyond Meat, we had the equivalent of the Chinese Department of Defense come in, and they wanted to understand this. And the reason is not from, they have the military side of things, but also they're really worried about infectious disease. And so if you did all the calculation curves on the number of cows and the amount of poop you'd have to have and the infected waterways and all the bacterial counts just in the general community was going to go up. They were incredibly concerned about that fact alone. And so they really wanted early entry and penetration of these things to turn back the dial on that.
Great.
My question would be actually building on that on another perspective. As we all see that this movement is very based in the States, and how do you see the future of this as you expand to more geographies, especially in terms of like cultural differences? Which challenges are you expecting, and what opportunities are you expecting? And in terms of challenges, how do you want to adjust those challenges?
That's a great question, yeah. Because we've talked about, the importance culturally of meat and dairy and, how we think about.
Again, I don't think I can have the same perspective of these guys because I'm more like on the sciencey side, right? But what I see is like, for instance, we talk a lot with Chinese or South American countries, and they're very interested by the cereal agriculture technology. So I don't know how to exactly answer your question, but I think if when people are worried about scaling up, making more of this meat, having the ability of making more of this meat, and as well the component about infectious diseases and removing that, I think people are really open to it. And right now, China is super interested in our products. I don't know about you guys, but I think you should complete.
One perspective on it would be, for example, how would a religious person perceive this product? And if we are aiming to convert that meat consumer, and there is a high chance that that person might be a very religious person, and how would you address that?
So I think very interestingly, actually Orthodox Jews are really into clean meat. And I was reading these articles about how suddenly pork might be okay. So I don't know if that answers the question.
So we had an investor and we had pork pizza, and he's like, I've never had pork before. He's Jewish, and he's a pretty well-recognized guy. So it was really fun to have this guy. He's like, is this what it tastes? Oh my God, no wonder everyone wants this. This is amazing, So we made a pork product. You can only get it on pizza, I think. I don't know where it's at now, but it is really awesome. So cultural differences is fascinating, right? I think we see early adoption around various areas, and it gets incorporated in ways that you not necessarily expect. So I mentioned the wonton example. The religious ones, I haven't seen too much of a barrier there. I've seen everything's been pretty much wide open in terms of the opportunities here. I don't see any pushback so far from any religious areas. The biggest pushback is probably from the mom who's never had vegetarian, vegan, anything, who shops at Ralph's in outside of LA or something like that. So that was our test group for Beyond Meat. We wanted to see who are these, what would happen if you provided this to moms who had never even considered this before. And what was interesting, and this is a really cool thing, and it applies to the clean meat sector, is that if you had something that was raw and cooked like meat, what they would do is they would sneak it in, because they knew that it was good for them. They didn't know why, but everyone was doing it, and so they should probably do it. But they didn't know how. They didn't want to be tree huggers. They didn't want their husband to freak out and think that there's some weird vegan thing. The kids weren't going to freak out. And so what they saw was this is a real opportunity where they would take this and they would take 10% of real meat and put it in there. And they did that. And they're like, oh my God, it totally tricked them. They didn't know. And I didn't have to tell them it was vegan or vegetarian or anything like that. Now, essentially, my kids and my husband are eating 4 days out of the week vegetarian, vegan food, right? And so, again, it's incremental impacts. You don't know where it's going to happen, right? And how people are going to work with things. And that's the beauty of new technology, this disruptive area, is that you have no idea where it's going to end up. And in ways that it's so much bigger than you could have ever imagined.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I hope you have all enjoyed this discussion. And please join me in thanking the panel.